Queercation?
Queercation was amazing. I loved meeting everyone, people who are just like me, you know, my queerness and being an artist and a tattoo artist. So I think that was my favorite part. I was actually born in Denver, in Inglewood, which is just a suburb of Denver. And then I've lived in Denver for the past 13 years.
Okay, wow, cool.
Yeah.
I lived in Denver like 25 years ago or so.
Oh,
In Cheeseman Park.
oh, I love that part of town.
Yeah, 25 years ago. So there's like a little feminist bookstore and it was like a
Oh,
cool little area. And I rented a 1 bedroom apartment for $400.
yep, that sounds about right.
Now it's like 4,000.
Oh yeah, it's quadruple that. So.
I mean, I love Colorado and Denver. I'm originally from Washington State, so I
Oh,
really
okay.
have a strong affinity for evergreen trees and the mountains, and just think it's so beautiful there.
Absolutely.
So shifting to your, your background, just, like what are your, your parents and how did you grow up?
Yeah, so my dad is originally from Michigan. My mom is from Colorado, and she grew up in New Mexico. On my mom's side of the family, I'm five of six generations born in the state of Colorado. So that kind of ties into my mom's indigenous identity, just how long her family has been here. My parents were a blind date. They ended up getting married. My mom had three kids from her prior marriage, which are my half siblings. So my dad ended up raising them, and they decided to have one more child, which was me. Surprise, surprise. But I grew up in Florence, Colorado, which is actually a really small town, probably 2.5 hours south of Denver. It's, I would say, 90% conservative Christian demographic. So as soon as I graduated high school, I got out of there because it was not the place for me to be at. Been in Denver ever since. I actually moved to Denver for college in 2010. Yeah, I loved college and I loved the big city, so I just stayed ever since because there's really nothing for me in my hometown other than my parents.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm also biracial. I'm Chinese and white, and so
Okay.
it's just, it's a different thing, to be mixed
Yeah.
race. And especially like I also have two older sisters, or I
Okay.
siblings that are 20 years older than me, white,
Okay.
from my father's side. And so
Yeah.
it's just interesting, like if you're a monoracial, like immigrant family, you have a family that says like this is who we are as a people. But as a mixed race person, everyone in the family can have a different identity. And you have
Right.
older siblings that are, different than you. With mixed race people, it's interesting because like how do your parents talk to you about what you are?
That was kind of an interesting thing growing up. I always knew that my dad was white and my mom was, as we say, brown, just for a collective term. But growing up, I don't think I really realized at the time that I was, navigating the world in a small town as a biracial kid. More so when I got to college and I started learning about identity and learning about myself, it kind of hit me, that I've been navigating, as I said, this world as someone who kind of lives in between, as I've always felt. And I feel like I've heard this from a lot of biracial people, but on for one side you're not this enough, and for the other side you're not that enough. So it was a little tough, trying to figure out, who I am and what I feel about myself, and how I present myself to the world.
Yeah. What did your parents tell you you are?
Well, so my one of my memories growing up was my favorite Disney movie was Pocahontas, and I remember watching that with my mom. And my mom she would be like, this is what we are. We're Native Americans. So I always had a personal affinity to Pocahontas out of all the Disney princesses. So she has been my favorite. But I think just seeing, knowing that was who we were, and that's where we come from. That kind of gave me a little sense of, you could say, community. As far as my dad goes, I feel like he, as a white man, he kind of, race kind of goes over his head a little bit sometimes, and even being married to a Chicano woman. So the older I've got, the more, the more educated I've become, the more I've had to kind of educate my dad about, like racial things and that sort of thing. So as far as like getting discussed in my family, it wasn't too much of a topic other than, if something would happen in the news and that sort of thing.
Exactly. And that's actually how, I mean, a lot of folks are in that situation. That's like someone else I talked to said it was like ethnic identity is more like a private, personal family thing or something. And
Yes.
often, like for international adoption or for mixed race people, often the white parent is quite racially clueless still.
Yes. That is actually a really good term that I would use for my father.
I mean, they just like my father sees me, I'm his daughter. Like I don't have a race, you know.
Yes. That is exactly how I
So
felt my dad
I was
saw me.
one time I told my dad, like, I talked to this journalist about being mixed race, and he wants to talk to you guys about being an interracial couple. And my dad was like, interracial couple? What are you talking about? It's just me and your mom, you know?
Yeah. Actually, that's really funny to say that because that actually happened not too long ago with my parents and my brother. They have my neighbors. My parents' neighbors are black and white, and my brother made a comment about them having an interracial marriage, the same as my parents, and my dad kind of did the same thing. He was like, "What are you talking about?" And my brother was like, "You guys are literally in an interracial marriage. Like you're white, mom's Chicano, like you guys are, So it kind of hit him in the head a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. And any reaction from your parents about queer identity?
When I came out to my mom, she told I remember the day I was actually 19 and I had just went out the night before to the club and watched my friends perform, and I woke up and I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna tell her. So I picked up my phone and I texted my mom and I was like, Mom, I have something to tell you. And I told her, and her response was, I love you. She said, I've always known that this was, going to be a thing one day. And she told me not to tell my father at that moment because he was going to get upset about it. So I always knew that there was some sort of, you know, like resistance from my father on that sort of thing, just going to church and hearing the things that they talked about at church and, hearing him talk about things at home. So that was another reason I didn't come out, was because I was afraid of what my father was going to do, kick me out of the house, disown me, that sort of thing. So I didn't even really tell my dad until probably years later when I brought one of my first boyfriends home, and I just kind of went about my day and acted like nothing was going on.
And so then the resolution, like,
There really was none. It was one of those things we just kind of swept under the rug. And I think just because of how he grew up and how conservative he is in his political views, it still makes him uncomfortable. So me and my parents, I talk to my mom mostly. I don't really talk to my dad, even though they're married. So it's kind of a very I guess you could say disheveled relationship. Like it's there, but I wouldn't say that it's functioning or operating as it should be.
uh-huh. So yeah, so he knows, but you just don't kind of talk about it directly.
Yeah, exactly.
That's very typical too. My mom was actually in a same-sex relationship for 20 years or something,
Oh,
but
wow.
people just talk about it like, oh, they're roommates or they're, and sometimes even people will say like maybe there's something more, but whatever. So it's just interesting that these things are there in front of everyone, but sometimes you just don't talk about it. It's so
Yeah.
funny too, because my mom and her partner Rita like had a 4-bedroom house. They share a bed,
Oh, yeah.
They have a picture on their wall. It's like Rita's Butch and my mom's Femme, and there's a picture of my mom sitting on her lap. It's like whatever.
Right.
They're friends.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what about like just your work background? Like did you have other, like when did you start getting into art and tattooing? Like did you have other jobs before that?
I knew from high school that I wanted to major in art. I've known since I was a kid that, well, A, I was gay, and that B, I wanted to be an artist. So those were two things that were very clear to me at a young age. So I majored in art right away. That was pretty set in stone. I did retail in college as my night and weekend job. And in retail, I did a little bit of merchandising, which has an artsier side to it. So that was kind of cool, getting to use some artistic skills in retail. But after I graduated, I actually wanted to work at the art museum, the Denver Art Museum. I had an internship at an art gallery being basically a gallery manager. I would, take down whatever exhibit was up for the next exhibit. I would paint the walls. I would get the shipment of the new artwork, unpack it, put it in the gallery catalog, set up the new show, do the marketing and all that. So that was kind of the job I wanted to do at the art museum. And they had a position, but they wanted 5 years of experience, which I obviously didn't have. So when that didn't work out, I found an ad for a tattoo apprenticeship, and I brought in my portfolio from college. And a lot of my art in college, coincidentally enough, was tattoo related, tattoo centered, because I kind of started getting tattoos in college. So in my mind, I was like, oh, maybe one day, I'll learn how to tattoo. So yeah, when the job with the art museum didn't work out, I found the apprenticeship, like I was saying, kind of how I got into tattooing.
I've never heard that when someone found an ad. Usually, they just start going around and badgering shops and stuff.
Yeah, so it was after I graduated, and I went to Starbucks by my house every day, getting on Craigslist, getting on, Job Monster and all of those websites, trying to find any artistic job I could. And on Craigslist, I actually found an ad for a shop that was seeking an apprentice. And I found a couple others on there actually as well. So that's kind of how I got the idea in my head. And then I actually went into the shop and scheduled an interview for the apprenticeship position. And again, this was in 2010, so it was a while ago.
And how was that experience then?
They hired me the next day after the owner looked at my portfolio and he talked to the other artists. They called me the very next day and they hired me. And then I think it was that following week is when I started. All just kind of a whirlwind happened, all at once. And I was like, okay, I guess this is what we're doing now.
And so what was the demographics of the artists there?
I was actually the only queer person to work there. There's probably 12 artists there. I think one of them was Mexican. So it was me and one other person who were POC. And again, I was the only queer person there. I did have a lot of struggle with the hazing aspect of the apprenticeship, some of the words that the artist would say, and even the owner would say. And, again, this was in 2010. So people aren't as sensitive to why we don't say those things back then as they are now. So I kind of had to have a conversation with the owner, and I was like, I like working here, but if you want me to continue working here, then you guys have to stop saying slurs. You have to stop, even if it's a joke, like, we're moving past that as a society. So that was a little bit difficult to get around and navigate, but they did eventually come around and they realized that, I was like, basically, you can't say those things because if you have clients in here who are queer, they're going to be uncomfortable. They're going to go tell their friends not to come here because they heard you guys talking bad and saying words that you shouldn't. So they came around and it got a lot better the more that I worked there, because the more respect that I got, the more I was able to call people out and kind of, direct things in that way.
Were there women artists?
Only two at the time. So it was mostly male and mostly white. Everyone was white and yeah, mostly male.
And so how long were you there?
I apprenticed for 15 months, and that was before I even started tattooing, and I had my own tattoo machine. And then after my apprenticeship, I worked there for about 4 more years as an artist. So I was there for 5, going on 6 years before I left that shop and then went to another one.
So the apprenticeship, like, are you getting paid? Are you working for free?
It is unpaid, so you're working for free. And I feel like that is how most traditional apprenticeships go. The trade-off is that you work for free, and then at the end of your apprenticeship you basically dedicate a year or 2 years or whatever the owner wants to the shop, so you have to work there. So that's kind of the trade-off. So during my apprenticeship, I was working retail still. I was doing about 80-hour work weeks between apprenticeship and my retail job. So I would work at the mall from 5 a.m. to 11 a.m. I would get off and go to the shop at 12. I would take a 30-minute nap in my car before I go in at 12, and then I would work from 12 to 8, sometimes 9 o'clock at the shop, go home and do my drawing assignments, and then wake up at 4 a.m. and go do it all over. I was for 15 months, so it was rough. I almost didn't make it a couple times, but I'm glad I stuck it out.
Yeah, wow. And just the hazing thing, I mean, that's a typical kind of tattoo culture. I guess what's different about your story is that you spoke up and that things changed.
Yeah, and I told them too. I told my boss because we kind of had a heart to heart moment, and I was like, I'm cool with getting you guys' coffee. I'm cool with cleaning the floorboards and the toilet on my hands and knees. I'm not cool with you guys like tormenting me and taunting me, and calling me names and just degrading me, because I told him how I grew up and what I experienced, and told him I had some pretty dark times growing up in my life, and with suicidal thoughts and that sort of thing. So I told him, as a 19-year-old kid entering this space, I was like, I've dealt with that my whole life and I'm not putting up with it anymore. So which it was kind of a terrifying thing to do that, because coming into his shop where it was his space and telling him, hey, I'm not putting up with this. But I was like, if I don't do it now, then it's never going to happen. So
Wow. Yeah.
yeah.
And you think their change was like it was good enough for you?
Yeah, it was. And I think they even continued that after I left. Because when I left the shop, and then the first time that I came back, they had actually hired, I believe, 2 more queer artists. They had hung a pride flag in the shop and an equal sticker, and they had let me do a little bit of that as I was there. But when I left, I noticed they really tried to make sure that that was a part of the shop, so that the future clientele was comfortable there.
Wow. Yeah, that's a really great story. Um,
Yeah.
and so how was that 4 years then?
It was really good, honestly. I've always been a very hard worker. I always put 120% into everything. So I worked a lot. I really tried to prove myself and let, not only the other artists, but my boss know that I was a serious artist. I was serious about tattooing. I was serious about making this, a lifelong career and essentially dedicating my life to it. So it was a great, 4 years. I got a lot of exposure and experience. But once I got to that 5-year mark, I kind of had this thought in my head, I've got to spread my wings a little bit and fly. And I didn't want to be at the shop that I apprenticed at and where I learned forever. So I was like, 5, 6 years, I felt good being there. And it gave me the confidence, and not only that, but the tools necessary to go work at another space as well.
Mhm. How was that transition to another space?
It was honestly terrifying. I did get to move with one of my coworkers that we were actually apprentices together. So we became artists together. And then there was another shop in town that had 2 spots open because they had 2 artists leave. So I came to my best friend, my coworker, and I was like, hey, like let's move to this other shop. Let's take this leap. So I didn't do it alone, which was nice, but we were both definitely terrified to leave this place that we had, essentially built ourselves in. But once we took that leap and we were in that space, it was kind of like, okay, this is the next chapter, that sort of thing. So then it just kind of turned into excitement.
Mm. And so what was the new shop like situation?
It was a little bit different because it was appointment only. So my first shop was walk-in based. So I did a ton of walk-ins. That was important for me. I realized that I don't like doing walk-ins. Once I got enough experience and I built my clientele. So going to an appointment only shop was nice because I got to focus on just my appointments and my drawings without any of the kind of distractions
That's a
of
natural progression. That's perfect.
yeah. So, and that's how I am now. Everything's appointment only, no walk-ins. So just less stressful that way.
Yeah. Are you still at that same shop then?
No, so I moved from that space, co-opened up a space with my best friend, my coworker that I was talking about. So we had that private studio for the last 3 years. And now I'm actually currently transitioning to going back into working into a shop setting. So I've done a little bit of flip-flopping here and there, but I've just been taking it by the, as it comes, thinking of everything as the next chapter in my tattoo career.
Mm. So you've been at like 4 shops?
Yeah, so this will be the one I'm going to now will be my 4th studio.
And so how many artists were at each shop?
The first shop had, I believe, 12. The second, and this is including me, the second studio had 5 artists. And then the private studio was just me and one other. And then this new studio is another like 12 artists
Oh,
studio. Yeah.
how was the climate at the subsequent shops?
Yeah, I was lucky to have my clientele follow me, which was great. And I think, tattooing in one city, one location for a long time really does build your clientele, and it really makes you have a strong background. So every place that I've been to, my clients have followed me, which is great. I've had I've been tattooing clients since I've started. So, 8 years that I've had people with me. Keeping those connections whenever I do leave, I still talk to a few of those people from the other studios. So keeping those connections open is important, I think, and just maintaining that sense of community, with tattooers.
Mm-hmm. And so you had good relationships with the other tattooers?
Yeah, I would say so. My boss at the first studio, not so much. He was a little upset at me when I was leaving. I was what he considered a cash cow in the studio. So I was one of the ones making him the most money because it was a commission-based studio. So yeah, me leaving was a little upsetting for him. So we kind of had a falling out, which I expected just from seeing other artists leave his studio. So that was really the only one that I had a not so pleasant experience with.
Mm. Well, that's not bad.
Yeah, yeah,
Considering. Um,
right.
like we, expect kind of like this hazing from, especially when you're an apprentice and then from other artists. But I was just thinking like, what about like dealing with discrimination from like clients?
And I think one of the reasons I don't like doing walk-ins is because
Yeah.
of that possibility. That studio that was a walk-in shop I worked at was a pretty high-end walk-in studio in Denver. We were the first one that would pop up on Google, on Instagram, that sort of thing. What I didn't like, and I had this experience multiple times, was someone who was a tourist coming into Denver from out of town, from a more conservative area, conservative state, and then them being visibly uncomfortable with getting tattooed by a visibly queer person. So that was one of the reasons that I didn't like walk-ins, was because you never knew who was going to come in and what they were going to get and whether or not they were going to like you. So doing appointment only, I can do consultations beforehand. I can meet the person, make sure that I'm comfortable and they're comfortable and that sort of thing. So yeah, it was really the most discrimination I got was from walk-in
Yeah,
clients.
that makes sense. And
Yeah,
especially just, yeah, how you find and relate to your current customers as far as getting to know them a bit beforehand.
right, right.
How do you describe like your artistic style and the evolution there?
My style over time has I started doing very traditional, bold color line tattoos, and then a little bit of black and gray. As I got more experience and I kind of got a little bit older, I realized, what I like tattooing, what I don't like tattooing. Now I'm predominantly a black and gray artist. I focus on a lot of anatomical subjects, the human body, skulls, figures, faces, portraits, that sort of thing. Two other avenues are geometry. So I do a lot of pattern work, mandalas, and then a lot of botanical elements. So floral, plants, nature related things. My background in school as a fine art major was a drawing and painting focus. I was mostly a drawing focus. So it was charcoal and pencil. And that's kind of what I grew up doing as well as pencil drawing. So my brain has always kind of been a black and white artistic viewpoint. I think that's why I'm more drawn to doing black and gray tattoos now as a tattoo artist.
Mm. And then of course, like working in a walk-in shop, I mean, that's important. Like you just have to be able to do whatever walks through the door.
Yeah, I think starting out as an artist, I think it's a very good thing for you to do to get experience and, do bold things and fine line things and watercolor and then black and gray things. And then you kind of get the feel for what you like doing, what you don't like doing. But I think starting out, it was a very important thing for me to do that rather than trying to focus and hone in on one thing that I wanted to master. I think that comes later in line.
Absolutely, yeah. Did you, over your career, attend many like conventions or educational conferences?
That was one of the things at that first studio. The boss there, he was kind of nitpicky about things, so we weren't really allowed to go to conventions. We weren't allowed to. He didn't really want us getting tattooed at other studios. He wanted us to get tattooed in the studio by the our coworkers to, promote the business. So that was one of the reasons why I wanted to leave that space, because I wanted to do those kinds of things. So yeah, once I went to the next studio, I was able to get tattooed at other places and start working at conventions. And that was actually where I did my first convention, was at my second studio. And that was, 6 years after I had been tattooing. So I was a little late to the game in that aspect.
And what was that experience like, going to conventions?
It was both exciting but terrifying. They're very high energy, high pay, like, fast paced type of environment. And then being around other artists who are, skill level is at yours, below yours, and then also way above yours is a little intimidating. So I'm kind of someone who thrives in chaos and chaotic environments. So I really liked it. I've done more conventions since then. My coworker is not so much the same, so she didn't really like the environment. But yeah, I have really taken to it. I'm social and I like to meet people, especially when it comes to art. You know what I mean?
Did you ever have like mentors or folks, relationships with other artists like outside of the shops you work at?
I stayed in touch with my few of my college professors after graduating. Mostly one of my painting professors and then one of my sculpture professors. So they gave me a little bit of guidance, and this was more so when I was trying to find, a job and that sort of thing. But I tried to make sure that I maintain those relationships a little bit after graduating and moving into the tattoo industry. But I was actually thinking about some of my college professors the other day, so that's funny that you mentioned that.
Mhm. Yeah, because tattooing, it's so like insular, like you don't really
Yeah.
get to meet other people. There's a lot of competition and stuff. So yeah, it's usually just your shop. And so, but having these networks with other people is great to strengthen our networks and stuff.
Absolutely.
You kind of implied like just your relationship to your clients, and that just that you can, meet with them. Maybe how do you find them? Like, do they find you on Instagram? Or, I mean, you said, you're in the same location over time, so it builds up and word of mouth, but I'm guessing like you can kind of cultivate a relationship and find people that, you both like each other kind of before you're doing the tattoo work.
Yeah, I've noticed mostly my clientele is mostly return clients, which is nice. When I do get new clientele, it's mostly from word of mouth. And then, the power of social media. Instagram is free marketing, which is amazing for, poor starving artists. A lot of it comes from the word of mouth, but then, I try to put the art on my page that I want to do more of. So, when there's someone looking for something specific, subject matter or style, I think that's kind of how you can get those people to, become interested in your work.
Have you been in a position where you have like you're kind of mentoring younger artists, or trying to contribute somehow in that way?
I have on at my current private studio, we had thought about taking on an apprentice. I feel like I've only been tattooing for 8 years now, but I feel like I wouldn't take on an apprentice maybe for a couple more years, maybe till I've got like 10 years under my belt. Just because I feel like I'm still a student, I feel like I'm still learning things, especially with how quickly tattoo technology is advancing nowadays. I'm using new machines and that sort of thing. So I think I would probably wait a little while until I took on an apprentice, but I do think that that is an important part of tattooing. And it's part of the practice is, handing off, passing off your knowledge to someone else who is eager and willing to learn.
When you were an apprentice, were you an apprentice for one artist or the whole shop, it sounds like?
The shop owner, he was my mentor, so I was technically his apprentice, but I was working for the whole shop. So I guess all of the artists were my mentors in another sense. They did, help me out and teach me things and that sort of thing. But when at the end of the day, when it came down to it, I followed my boss's orders. Whatever he said is what I did.
Okay. And you said this next shop is you and your coworker, just the two of you, or
Yeah, just the two of us. It's a
or no,
private.
you said you're going to go into a shop with 12 artists?
Oh yeah, yeah. This next shop, I'm going into a bigger studio.
Okay. What's that shop going to be like?
It's kind of the same as the first. I think it's predominantly white artists. It's about half male, half female, which is nice. I definitely am more comfortable in that type of environment where it's a little more mixed gender. And then I think I'm one of maybe me and one other person are POC. So it's kind of it's mostly white shop as well.
And is it a walk-in shop again?
It's a appointment only studio. They do walk-ins, like if someone were to walk in and if someone was open, but the chances of that are very slim to none. So it's a predominantly studio appointment only studio.
But I
Okay.
wanted to switch to your tattoo collecting also. And you mentioned like it was in college when you started to get tattoos. Like, what was that first tattoo?
Yeah, so actually my first tattoo, I was 16 years old. My mother actually took me and
Oh.
signed for me. So I have this running joke with her that it's her fault that I'm tattooing right now because she opened Pandora's box, you know. So yeah, my first one was at 16, and then at 18 when I moved to college, and you know, my parents couldn't tell me no. My first one was small, probably this big on my ankle. But then when I moved to
What was
college,
the image?
it was I can show you if you want to see it. I'm pretty flexible. It's this little swallow. Let's see. On my ankle right
Oh yeah,
there.
that's nice.
So just little tiny. I had to hide it at school was the only preface that my mom gave me. Um, so yeah, and then once I moved to college, I got my chest tattooed when I was 18 years old, and I kind of went crazy from there. Growing up, all my siblings, as I mentioned, they were all older, so they all had tattoos. So I was always like, I want a tattoo, you know what I mean? So I also blame my siblings a little bit for getting me interested in it. And it's cool now because I actually tattoo all of my siblings now.
Oh yeah, that's awesome. And mom?
I have done one on my mom. Yeah, my dad says he wants one, but he doesn't know what he wants yet. So we're trying to get him to figure it out.
And so what was the chess piece?
It's a ram skull. So I got a ram skull because I'm an Aries is my zodiac. I did it as like a sugar skull to kind of reference my Mexican heritage. And then I have four roses, two on either side, one for me, my brother, and then my two sisters. And that was my first really, really big piece. My brother's friend actually did it, who was a tattoo artist who tattooed my brother. He was kind of my first, I guess you could say, tattoo mentor that got me interested in tattoos in a serious way because he was tattooing me, you know, at 18 years old.
What are the images or styles that you're collecting as far as your personal tattoos?
It's kind of funny because I started getting color tattoos, and
Mm.
I would say probably 80-85% of my tattoos are color, which is interesting because I'm a black and gray artist.
Right.
So I kind of started getting most of mine are American traditional style with bold lines and bold color. A lot of the imagery though is related to my heritage. So I have a lot of Mexican imagery. I have a lot of Native American imagery. I have a few things that are related to my dad's heritage. Everything that I have is kind of a mix of styles, but most of it I would say is in some way or another connected to my identity as a person.
Mm-hmm. And so you said that first shop, like they wanted you to get tattoos from the other artists. Like, is that cool with you? You like their work and stuff?
Yeah, I did, you know, and as a young kid who A doesn't have money and B wants
Uh-huh.
more
That's
tattoos,
true.
like getting free tattoos was
Okay,
just
yeah, as an apprentice, that's
yeah, apprentice. So there's a point in time I was getting a tattoo like every other week, you know what I
okay,
mean?
that's how
So
they're paying you.
yeah, yeah. So I was like, whatever you want, just slap it on me. So I was just kind of like a canvas, not only for the artist, but you know, part of the apprenticeship is you help your other apprentices learn. So I was kind of like a, you know, a test dummy, if you will, for the other apprentices as well, and vice versa.
Uh-huh. Any tattoo regrets?
You know,
Lasers, cover-ups?
that is a good question. None that I actually have one that I regret that I did get covered up, and it's also this small. I got it for my ex-partner. This was 6 or 7 years ago. I surprised him and got a semi-matching tattoo, and then when we broke up, I got it covered up. And even as I was getting this little diamond, I knew that I shouldn't be doing it in the back of my mind. So it's kind of just funny how my subconscious is always right.
Right. Is that what you tell your clients then when they ask for partner tattoos?
I just let them know. I'm like, just be very, very sure, because I feel like that it's I don't want to say bad like juju or anything, but I feel like it kind of puts those vibes out into the universe for something bad to happen. So I just always am like, make sure this is exactly what you want before you do it.
Yeah. I think just that thing in itself is kind of like an insecurity thing. Like it's
Right.
it's not a good idea.
Yeah.
A
Yeah.
relationship tattoos. Your children are fine, but
Right. Right.
uh, what about your future plans for collecting tattoos?
The majority of the things that I know that I want, I keep a list in my phone of tattoos that I want to get. So once I have all those, I'll probably fill in the rest of the spaces with artist flash work. I do like getting artist flash because I feel like as an artist, I get most excited when I do my own artwork, my own flash pieces, my own designs. So, and some of my favorite tattoos that I have are artists' own flash work. So I would love to be covered at some point, head to toe, probably even a little on my face, much to my mother's dismay. Yeah, I feel like the more tattoos that I've got getting older, the more I feel like myself. Which is kind of an odd thing to say, but I think I started getting them at a young age because it was kind of my an armor in a sense, and letting the world know, hey, don't fuck with me kind of thing. Like, stay away from me. I don't want your bullying. I don't want your discrimination. So yeah, I love getting tattoos, and I think I'll probably be hopefully covered head to toe one day.
Hmm. And so you're saying you're collecting like images in your phone, but also just like some artists that you admire and their
Yeah,
styles.
yeah. I keep a list of artists in my phone. One of the things I've been doing in the past years is traveling to get tattoos and
Yeah.
making a trip around it. Like going somewhere specifically to get the tattoo and then doing some other stuff. But I've got a list of people that I would love to add to my collection at some point.
Yeah. And you talked about like, the tattoos as armor, just kind of sending these messages out. Like, what about like reaction to your tattoos just from anyone in your life, like any notable kind of reactions?
I think my family and my friends are all pretty much used to it at this point. I notice I get the most reactions from my tattoos in the summertime when I'm wearing shorts and a tank top. And you can see a lot of them. And it's kind of funny because the one place that I get the most stares and that sort of thing is at the airport. Anytime I'm in an airport, which because there's people from all over, you know what I mean? But I can always guarantee that I'll get someone to make a comment or something if you can see all my tattoos, at the airport.
Yeah. Have you done much like visiting to other shops as an artist?
It was actually 2020 was the year that I was going to go and start guest spotting and doing more conventions and that sort of thing. And then COVID happened, obviously. So the past 2 years, I've been traveling and doing guest spots now, which is really fun. I actually have one in a couple weeks in Salt Lake City. So I have loved that aspect of the job of being able to, take my suitcase with my tattoo gear and go to another shop and meet other artists and get exposure to different styles and that sort of thing. So I think that's probably, I would say, one of my favorite things about being a tattoo artist is the ability to travel.
Do you follow like any certain hashtags or how do you find folks that you admire?
There's a queer tattooer hashtag that I'll follow. That's how I find a lot of artists. And then I'll find a studio and I'll kind of just go down the rabbit hole of looking at every artist profile. And I really like to look through people's portfolio and that sort of thing. So I know if I find a studio where I like one person's work, I'll probably like a bunch of other people's work as well. So
Getting to Queercation, then how did
yeah.
you get connected to these folks?
I believe I saw it was a sponsored ad on my Instagram
Oh,
that popped up, and it was Queercation, and I was like, I read the educational conference for queer and ally tattooers, and I was like, oh my gosh! So I immediately followed the page because I was like, I've never seen anything like this before. I've seen tattoo conferences, of course, but nothing that was queer centered and queer focused. So I was like, I'm gonna go. I'm gonna make sure I get a ticket, and I'm very glad I did because it was probably like one of the coolest things I've done as a tattoo artist so far.
wow. Okay, so you saw an ad. Wow, you didn't know
Yeah.
the people beforehand or have connection to this group.
No, and then I got onto the page, and then I started, doing my detective sleuth work, and I was like, okay, who's running this? Like, who are the artists going to be there? The people that are presenting. I actually followed some of the presenters already, like Toby Linwood from Portland. I already had been following his work, and I was like, oh, Toby's going to be there, so I'm like, I get to meet him, and so yeah, I just kind of started going through the page and making sure that I was keeping tabs on everyone who was going to be there.
What did you think of Queercation?
Queercation was amazing. I loved meeting everyone, people who are just like me, my queerness and being an artist and a tattoo artist, so I think that was my favorite part. I mean, if this happens in the future, I definitely would recommend people to come to it in the future if it does happen, because I will definitely be coming back.
So what did you get out of the conference?
I got I would say, a renewed sense of inspiration that I had been looking for. I feel like as artists, we kind of hit plateaus and we kind of go through these ebbs and flows of our creative thought processes. So that was probably the greatest thing, was getting that inspiration and seeing other people who are also inspired as well. And then just the networking in the community, and meeting artists who are like you, who have experienced the hazing and gone through the discrimination, not only from being a tattoo artist but from being a child, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
so connecting on that level was really great, and just feeling comfortable. Like, I didn't feel, a lot of times when I go into shops that are very cis het, environment focused, I get the sense of, I kind of close off myself off a little bit. But being at Queercation, it was like, I'm 100% me. I'm comfortable. To interact and talk and that sort of thing. So yeah, that was another highlight for sure.
Yeah, yeah. What an amazing event. And that, we got like 50 people that were, to show up. Like, it's so
Ah,
hard to actually get people to show up, and what great events and stuff like that. It was super fun.
absolutely.
Well, those are most of my questions. Do you have anything else to add about just being an artist, or talking to younger generations, or being a collector?
I mean, I don't think so. I guess I would just maybe end on, like, for anyone who's considering, any young queer artist who's considering going into this, I would just say that there is space for you in this industry. There is space for you to be who you are, and to celebrate you and your artwork. It does sometimes, I feel like, take a minute to get there, just like with anything else. But if you're serious and you're dedicated, then you can definitely make this work. And I would say I'm, maybe living proof of that.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Well, I think that is great. And definitely, like, yeah, I really appreciate your time and your stories. And
Yes.
it's just so cool to talk to people like at all stages of their careers, and just what is changing in the industry. But I'm really surprised to hear, like, I mean, I wrote my book came out in 2015, and my documentary came out in 2010. So I've talked to like older generations. I consider this project talking to newer generations. And I'm surprised, like, it's like all of y'all still went through like some toxic kind of tattoo shop stuff. And so it's still, out there. But I guess, I mean, you showed a real good example of how, you change the atmosphere there. And that just people are demanding it. And like you said, it's like for the clients too. Like, you just can't behave in that old school kind of way anymore at all in any profession.
No,
Like, these old white dudes are used to running the show, like the boomer generation. But things are changing in the whole world, so you just can't, act in that toxic masculine sexual harassment kind of way anymore. And so
absolutely.
our clients are all kinds of people, and we have to, adapt and make folks comfortable in all ways. And also, just as, people of color and having different kinds of ethnic backgrounds, like, I mean, I'm sure you as an artist see that lots of, I mean, white people too, like all of us get tattoos that represent our ethnic background. And so it helps to have more knowledge about all ethnic backgrounds, so
Ab-
that you can tell, be familiar with the iconography, the images that people want to
yeah.
get and stuff. So it
Yes.
just helps to have like diverse people to have that kind of information.
Yes. And then you're only going to bring in, you know, a more diverse clientele
Right.
with that as well.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, so those are you know, most of my things. So
Wonderful.
yeah, I really appreciate, you know, talking to you and
Yes.
yeah, hope to be able to keep us together as a community and create ongoing products. Like it was so great to see their images from, you know, their gathering like yesterday or whatever it
I,
was.
I know. I was like, I wish I was in the Bay because I
Yeah.
totally would have went, but I'm here obviously. So I like to look at the pictures though and figure out who was there.
Yeah, and we also need to spread out geographically. Like it can't just be the Bay. Like I'm glad to see there was at least one group of people from New Jersey, like or
Yeah.
Baltimore, I think. Like I could go to their shop. And I did find that there's a queer tattoo shop here in my area in Troy, New York. So I'm gonna reach out to them. So
Very cool.
hopefully in the future, like Denver would be a great central spot.
Yeah. And there's actually there was a, I don't know if you've met anyone else from Denver at Queercation, but there's a lot of Denver people there. And I'm staying in touch with some of them. So I was like, you know, Denver would be a great place for
Yeah.
Queercation one day as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope so. All right, cool. Well, we can leave
Yeah.
it there then.
All right. Well, thank you for your time. I appreciate it. That was great
Thank
talking to you. And then yeah, if you need anything else, just let me know. And then maybe I will hopefully see you at another Queercation in
Yes,
the
definitely. Definitely.